Welcome to the Alternative Acoustic Podcast. I'm Chris of the Chris Woods Groove Orchestra, and this podcast is brought to you by Ibanez UK. In this episode, I chat with Will McNicol. Will happens to be one of my favourite all-time people. He's a great friend, but conveniently, he happens to be one of the world's finest acoustic guitarists, a real artist, a real composer for guitar. I think so much of this conversation is going to resonate with all different types of acoustic guitarists. There's one particular thing that Will delves into, which is composing for practice. In other words, creating original music on the guitar to sort of push certain techniques forward. It's a really interesting subject, and I know you're going to enjoy listening.
I think there's something quite nice about the fact that, practice is so often done, on one's own. So you are kind of just left to your own devices to practice. And the idea people would say, I've got to go and practice that. Or a teacher might say, you should practice that. And what does that actually mean? Like, what is the actual thing that you do when you're on your own? You sit down here, right, practice time. Now what? And everyone's got different ways into it and around it, but I think it's kind of comparatively not talked about as much as maybe it should be, because I think a lot of people perhaps lack the practice skills or the things that they can do in practice to make it really enjoyable, healthy, fulfilling, and all the good stuff. I think the idea that you just sit and just play the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and that's what practice is. You can miss some of the magic, perhaps, and miss some of the kind of...
My take of it tends to be just to play the same thing over and over again, particularly if I play it in the wrong way and just do it round and round in a loop and gradually increasing in speed and aggression.
Aggression is good. I like that.
As I sort of whip myself into an absolute frenzy of failure until my muscles have become tense. And then eventually I just sort of go, well, actually, I don't think I'm going to do that bit anymore. Well,
that's certainly one approach. And I think more people should give it a go. The aggressive practice into what would you call it? Like a frenzy of
failure.
Frenzy of failure. Wow.
But I think jokes aside, I think that's probably quite a familiar thing for a lot of people.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. Because as a teacher, that's what you see so often, isn't it? When someone is sort of essentially, if you teach something or show something, and then someone is learning it in front of you and going around, and 9 times out of 10 the feedback that you want to give is just maybe slow down.
Sure.
And you're doing the same mistake again. So you need to slow down enough to not do the same mistake, and it's just so human, isn't it? It's like our inbuilt stress responses to moments of physical crisis can be quite good, running away, fight or flight. But when it comes to like stress responses to practice, like most people, their natural response is to do the technique that I was just describing, isn't it? Speed up,
throw the guitar
get stressed,
out the window.
tensed up. Yeah, what's your approach?
Well, I mean, I would be lying if I said there wasn't like elements of frustration and anger. I mean, I haven't quite managed to reach that point that you perhaps have reached, where it is a frenzy
of failure.
But it is a very human thing, isn't it? And there's frustration that can bubble up if there's inconsistency. Like one day you play it's fine, the next day you play it's not fine. You think, what's going on there? And I suppose I didn't, when I was younger, I didn't think a huge amount about it. I just kind of did it. And I kind of didn't really appreciate some of the intricacies of what made for, good practice, or some of the things I could perhaps call upon to help. And like the thing that making a mistake, for example, and like what is a mistake? And how has it happened? Like, what specifically is it? Can you actually find the thing that's going wrong? And can you kind of hone your practice to that specific thing? Because for example, if I'm playing like a phrase of music, and I might think to myself, that's a difficult phrase, and it might be like 8 bars or whatever. I think that's a difficult phrase of music that I'm going to have to practice that 8 bars. But the truth of the matter is, it's probably not a difficult phrase of music. There's probably like moments within it that are causing it to be quite challenging to play for one reason or another. Not the whole thing. So I suppose I'm kind of thinking a little bit about trying to find those moments, like, and be really specific. Why is that hard? Like, what is it about that thing that's making it difficult? Is it the way that I'm placing the finger on the fretboard? Is it like how I've got my hand, how I'm leading into a transition, how I'm getting ready early?
Rather than just simplistically
repeating it over and over.
That's hard.
Again.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you would just do the 8 bars over and over again. You don't know where the difficult bits are. You might be ingraining something that isn't helping. So if you can actually try and pinpoint what the specific thing is that you find difficult, then you can kind of more easily practice that thing. And that can be quite helpful. And I've experimented with all sorts of little tips and tricks in the practice room, like using a timer, for example. So let's say I've isolated one element that is tricky and I've zoomed into that, I've understood what it is. Mm-hmm. I might set a timer for like 1 minute, and I'll just spend 1 minute on just that very specific thing. Let's just say it could be just one particular change, the way the fingers are moving, and I'll just jam between those changes a little bit for 1 minute and just to deal with that specific thing. And that can be quite helpful, because there's the other school of thought in practice where you can kind of take that phrase or whatever, you've got to play it, I don't know, like 3 or 4 times correctly back to back, and then that means practice is done. But that can be quite stressful because you get to like the 3rd pass or the 4th pass, and you think, oh God, I really hope I get this right. And then you get that kind of little niggle and you think, oh, I've messed up. I've got to go back to the beginning again and start the whole process again. Whereas the timer is neutral. Like, it just gives you like a finite end. And what will be, and you can come back to it again and again.
I think that's an interesting one in itself, whether you go back to the beginning when you reach a point of a mistake. Do you stop and go back? Do you stop and go back? Or do you... I think for me, I get best results when I sort of fumble through, because I get in a real sort of crazy loop of go, trip over, go back to the beginning, and see that with people learning as well. Sometimes that sort of, actually, you've got to blag it a little bit. You've got to... What do you reckon?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many different ways around it, and everyone will have a slightly different way of going about it. But I think the thing that is really nice to do is just to think about it a bit and just think, okay, well, what am I actually doing when I'm practicing? What are the things that I'm looking to achieve? Like, have intention behind what you're doing when you're practicing can be really helpful. And then just try a few different methods and see what works for you. Taking little breaks is really important, I think, to make sure you're not overdoing it both physically and mentally, But I think, I suppose I try and encourage my own students away from just mindless repetition as a way of practicing. I think it's nice to have intention behind what you're doing. So you can kind of like keep track of it, understand what you're doing. I think intention can be quite helpful.
Petteri Sariola mentioned this to me, but I don't know whether it's his or credit him, but this simplistic approach to when you're practicing something, to start from different points. So whereby if your melody was... you would play it once, which was slightly different, and then the next time you would start from, or just to sort of break that mental I don't know. Yeah, it's like a rut, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because even if you've been playing it wrong, your brain doesn't really sort of consciously go, well, that's wrong. What it does is it goes, that's where you keep doing that. So that's how we'll keep doing it. I'll do that subconsciously for you now. Whereas if you're sort of breaking the cycle by taking yourself out of it, then give yourself an opportunity to, it's like being conscious of it, maybe slightly, like that intention thing, like you're saying, I suppose.
I think that's a great shout. I mean, I think that the idea of being able to hop in at any moment to be able to practice is really valuable. Really hard, though. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. And I think that the temptation is always to start at a natural beginning of something, like a beginning of a line or a beginning of a phrase or whatever. But the ability to just kind of like zoom in and hop into whatever you do, whatever the specific issue is, and just get there quickly is quite valuable, I think. It makes the best use of your time. Going back to what I said earlier about, well, you've isolated the problem. It's not the whole line. It's this thing. It's this thing that's derailing it. So you can kind of zoom in on that and derail and just kind of get to that point particularly is quite helpful. And then being creative in practice, and just being free with it is also really nice, rather than feeling like you're putting up barriers all the time. I mean, I think that one of my favorite techniques, if I'm practicing something like a tricky chord change, is that chord change, if you're practicing it in the context of a piece, will happen in the way that it happens in the piece. So it might have a fingerstyle pattern associated with it, and you might be going from one shape to another, and it might be a bit of a tricky left hand change that you're trying to learn. And one of the things that I quite enjoy doing is just taking it out of the context of the piece and just jamming it and be creative with it as just a chord change. So mix up the rhythms, strum it, like free yourself from how it appears in like the context of the piece and just have some fun with it. And that can really help you kind of relax into the practice of that particular chord change. In the same way, like, we think about the kind of open position chord shapes that are kind of bread and butter, and a lot of guitarists can do these without thinking about it. And then how do we get to that point of like not being able to, just not thinking about it? We just can do it instinctively almost, And the reason for it really, I think, is because you've done them in so many different contexts, in so many different ways, changed in and out of them in so many different contexts. So then they become so
it's
natural.
not just that you've played GCD over and over again, it's because you've played GCD and then you've played CG.
Well, exactly. It's all these kind of mix and match approaches to the shapes. And then a piece of music might present a new shape, and it's not had that kind of journey yet. And in the piece, it might not have that journey. It'll be a very specific thing that happens with that new shape. But you can be creative with it and maybe change through like add different chords around it, or just experiment with different patterns, different rhythms, to kind of give your brain a few different contexts to try the same shape, and that can be kind of fun because it removes the repetitive aspect of practice, playing the same thing from the same piece over and over again. You can just start having a bit of fun with the change, and that can be quite nice.
The Alternative Acoustic Podcast is proudly supported by Ibanez UK. Now, the Ibanez V Series has long stood for high quality at seriously affordable prices, available in all kinds of finishes, shapes and sizes. Now, I got to try all of them out recently, and a particular favourite of mine was the incredible Mini, which is the perfect travel size guitar. I mean, it sounds way bigger than it looks. The entire V Series and all Ibanez guitars are available now at Gear for Music, so make sure you go and check them out. What about you for practice, mate? What do you... Because I appreciate we're talking about practice in a kind of, a general philosophical overview of practice itself and mechanically how it works. What kind of things do you practice rather than just your pieces, so that when you go out you don't make mistakes, because mistakes are not acceptable?
Is that your line?
That's my line. Yeah,
that's my line, and I'm sticking to it.
No, I feel like that's what must go on in your head, because you don't make mistakes.
I do make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time.
Oh, you don't. Yep. And that's why it's so awful playing with you on the same bill, Will.
Come on now, Chris. I make mistakes all the time. Mistakes are part of the journey, right? And you've got to kind of just accept them for what they are. And all I think you can do is increase the hit rate of success, but it's never going to be 100%.
less mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Less mistakes.
Yeah, and just feeling comfortable is nice, isn't it? And that's not always easy. But your question was to do with like, what do I practice? And
yeah. Other than your pieces, like how do you? Because obviously, like the etude thing that I think you have going on. So go on.
Well, I mean, my practice is defined these days by what I'm working towards at that particular time. So, for example, if I've got a recording that I want to make, my practice will be geared in that direction. And a great thing to do when one is preparing for a recording, I think, is to record as part of your practice. Because recording is a funny thing, isn't it? That red button syndrome. The infamous thing.
And it's always a nice leveling exercise to hear how bad you actually do sound
it's like,
as well, isn't it?
It's like listening to your voice on an answering machine. You're like, is that really? And people still actually have conversations with me. Oh my goodness. So I think that the way that you prepare for certain things is kind of how I'm looking at my practice, I should say. So if I know that I've got a recording that I'm looking to create, I'll be like, okay, well, I need to practice recording. I need to practice this piece or whatever it might be in the context of recording. So getting used to how it feels to record the piece and recording sections, and that can be really nice because I think that using recording as part of practice is really valuable. And it begins to feel less like a big deal, and less like an end goal, but just as like a part of the continuation of what you've already been doing anyway. I think that if you want to go and do some recording, I think one of the best things you can do is just sit down and record yourself and listen back. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can just be with a phone. It doesn't really matter. It's just that act of pressing that button.
Reflecting.
Yeah,
right?
and obviously, and listening back, and listening back in a healthy way as well, because we're quite guilty of finding the negatives in things first, right? It's like, oh god, that was rubbish, or that was awful, or whatever. Like, I've got better over the years at like taking a little bit of a step back from all of that, and just go, no, let's just leave the ego behind for a moment. Let's just try and be kind of objective about this. Like, what's good? Like, what's good about it? What could I work on? What could I improve? You get a lot of information from that. In fact, I had a student here in the studio last week, and we recorded a piece. He was working on a piece to record, and he was absolutely fascinated by the process and listening to it back. He saying things like, "Oh, I was hearing things in the recording that I never really appreciated when I was playing," and things that are going to help me work on particular moments. But then I could also sit back and go, like, yeah, that's a cool thing that I've done. Like, it's nice to record and listen back and go, you know what, that's great. So it's kind of can also serve as a tangible outcome for the work, which is kind of quite nice.
You do have a nice positive spin on things, though, Will, don't you? That's the knowing you quite well. And like, what I always found refreshing of spending time with you was that you balanced out my approach of, I've never really been actually proud of anything that I've made musically or happy with, and you're like, well, yeah, no, I'm happy with that, and this is as good as it will be for now, and it's time to let go of that project and move on to the next one. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Why are you not dwelling on all these mistakes? And you can make that a positive, and that's great. Good for you, man.
Well,
good for you.
It's by no means a perfect formula. I'm certainly, I've been down some pretty dark rabbit holes in front of microphones before. There's no doubt about it. But as with everything, it takes practice, right? The more you do it, the more you get used to it, etc., etc. It's never. I'm never going to say it's easy. I still find it challenging. One of the things that I've always struggled with actually in front of mics is to capture all of the kind of emotive qualities of the music that I would usually access when I'm playing live, and trying to capture that kind of in the moment playing rather than, I guess I sometimes get the feeling that when you're playing in front of microphones, you're under the microscope a bit, and as a result, in my case anyway, it would manifest itself as me becoming quite reserved in my playing. like favouring kind of quote unquote like a really kind of perfect articulation rather than like something that feels good.
It's fantastic. I think that's just emphasised by your accent, as you say, being reserved and perfect articulation.
Oh my goodness.
Which I think it comes across as quite reserved with perfect articulation. I think it does.
But that's not good. Like that's not what you want necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Like you want a bit of something. It's a bit of something. And I remember. Yeah, exactly. You know.
Do you turn that up? That person inside you somewhere.
Yeah. I try to. I mean,
the alter ego of Will McNicol. Come on, just play some fingerstyle guitar. Doesn't matter if it's a bum note. It's just rock and roll, man.
Yeah, maybe I need to try that accent. Maybe that'll help. But I'm reminded of when I worked with Clive Carroll, who helped with my album Dragonflies, Frogs and Bumblebees, right? And he, first of all, he helped me a lot in, like, before I was anywhere near to recording, just in terms of composition. But then I would send him takes when I was recording it to get some feedback on. And he would remark a couple of times that he felt that like one or two of the takes felt quite safe, you know, and I was like, yeah, I mean, exactly that, you know, it's me being safe. It's like me taking the kind of path of least resistance to get like something that sounds nice and clean, but it's just a bit polite. Which reminds me of something that was in one of my primary school reports where one of my teachers had written, Will is too polite.
My God, really?
I know. So
Christ,
I came in the following day like effing and blinding.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's been something that has I've worked on over the years, and I think that it's just trying to get the balance right.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Well, I mentioned about etudes.
Oh yes,
Will, and I thought you were going to sort of jump on that, but you didn't.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent, didn't I?
Yeah, it was a lovely tangent, and good to hear about Clive as well. Can we talk about? Well, maybe you can describe what a etude or etude. How do you? Go on.
Etude.
Tell me.
Yes, well, I mean, study, I suppose, isn't it? It's a.
Is it like French for study or something, or is it?
I think so. We'd have
Let's
to
say
fact
it is.
check.
I reckon.
But I'm pretty sure it is.
It's a podcast. You can just say anything and just pull it off as fact, and everyone will believe us and carry on, and it'll.
It's fine. So yeah, I suppose. Well, one of the things that I've always quite enjoyed doing from a teaching perspective is trying to teach whatever it might be. Let's say it's a technique in the context of actual music, as opposed to being isolated in something. So, like when I'm writing a study, or I often use the little phrase "study piece," like is what I often use to describe these pieces that are short things that attempt to show some element which is useful, either from a technical point of view or a musical understanding point of view. But the crucial thing about them is I try and make them like really like satisfying to play and sound good and sound like, oh, I'd quite like to play that. I kind of lean towards that a bit more than the slightly more dry technical exercise approach.
Could you show it? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I tell you what, if you play it really badly, we can always come back and edit it in.
We can edit it in,
and no one will know, unless I leave this bit in, of course. Could you play a little bit of one of those sort of more beautiful sounding sort of, or a short excerpt?
Yeah, I could give you a little example of something actually, because it's kind of how my whole compositional journey started in the first place. It was like,
okay,
I want to get better at something on the guitar, and why not write a bit of music to get better at it. So a really simple example. It's one of the first pieces I ever wrote.
What an interesting perspective of composing for practice.
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend.
As a subject,
highly recommend. It's deeply satisfying and can lead you off in all sorts of interesting directions.
Oh, that's really cool, Will.
But one of the very first pieces I wrote is a tune called Autumn Breeze. And it contains within it a few different things, but I'll give you a little really simple extract from it. Was the idea of just having a melody over an arpeggio. It was quite a simple thing. Like, can I just get a really beautiful sounding melody over like a simple chord sequence? So I ended up playing something a bit like this. So all that is like G, E minor, C, D7, right?
I love the fact that was one of the first pieces of music that you created, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't have the timeline specific in my mind, but it was very early. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I did. I mean, the way you played it was utterly otherworldly. So maybe it's partly the playing, but
I probably played it awful back in the day. Do you know when I first wrote it?
It probably sounded rubbish. I mean, even that sounds pretty good.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
But that was. I just love the fact that anyone listening to this now is going, "What? That was the first." I mean, that was stunning. That was borderline spiritual. No, it was. It was a spiritual experience. What you just played there, Will. That was beautiful.
But isn't it a great example of like simplicity is often the way to go, and it's like it's like campfire chord and a melody on the first string and second string, and that's it, and it doesn't need anything more than that. And all I was trying to do was, I wonder if I can do this. I wonder if I can just get a melody to sit over some chords, and that's what came out. Later on in the piece, there's a bit where I was like, at the time I was practicing, tremolo, that kind of technique, which I was learning in the context of classical guitar. It's that rapid repetition, like thumb, ring, middle, index pattern.
Cool. Yes. Play, show.
And I was thinking, well, I need to get better at tremolo, so perhaps I should write a little thing in this piece where it goes into some tremolo. So I think I had like from the D7. Just a little chromatic descent with a static tremolo note, because I wanted to get a bit better at tremolo. I mean, that was it. Just like giving myself opportunities to practice this stuff in the context of actual music. Well, it felt like that to me anyway. Rather than, I mean, obviously, look, I mean, there's room for the kind of drier, like, technical exercise approach. I mean, I spent a lot of time practicing tremolo with muted strings and all that kind of stuff, but it has to be balanced in my mind with like something that you play and you think, oh yeah, no, that's quite nice, it's quite fun. And it's
because perhaps that when you're doing that, you're developing your emotional, your deeper connection with all those variables, and for want of a better phrase, sort of near, well, I said what you played was the spiritual experience, and that's, yeah, for want of a better description, it's kind of that element of your playing that you're able to bring into the practice when you're doing it as a piece, right? Rather than going thumb 3 2 1, thumb 3 2. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it provided a really nice outlet for it all. Because I certainly did my fair share of fairly dry practice over the years, but having that outlet, which was creative, I mean, that was it for me. I just loved the process of making music on the guitar and just exploring it and going, oh, like chasing little musical ideas until I found what I was feeling it needed, finding what I felt it needed to happen. It's that kind of intuition thing, which is really interesting. And I was just bitten by the bug, and I was like, yeah, man, let's just keep doing this because I really enjoy this as a process. Getting a finish,
the emotional element,
totally the emotional element, and it's very tied up together in my mind, like that creative intuition and how you feel when you're playing or when you're writing. For a long time, I think I didn't really trust it, or I almost was wanting to be told, no, that's good, that's the right thing to do, but then you kind of realise that it's a very freeing thing, writing your own music, because it's just yours. And then you start building a bit of confidence with trusting your gut a bit. And it's a funny thing. I just always kind of trips me up when I try and describe it. But it's the intuition of kind of knowing when something feels right or feels like it's not quite there yet from a musical perspective. And
visceral, I think, is a good word.
Yeah.
And that sort of, embodying the sort of, the whole body feeling of something being something working, I suppose. Oh, well, I don't know. I suppose it doesn't link to actually it working, but just at least, connecting with it in a physical sense. But we were talking before we recorded, when basically we did this podcast, unedited. I definitely cut that bit out. We were talking earlier about that. This element of practice, this emotional, this visceral, this intuitive, kind of irrational, I suppose, actually, because I think the world can be split up, can't it, into the sort of the rational element and the irrational element being it's certainly not discussed in music education wider. And I think, within guitar circles particularly, isn't it? It's sort of neglected. And I think you even said people can feel almost embarrassed or feel shy of sort of talking about that element.
Absolutely. And, fair enough. I mean, I get it. It's difficult to talk about this stuff, It's much easier to talk about the kind of mechanical, the technical, all of that kind of thing. But the wonderful thing about music is, when you listen to a piece of music that connects with you on some level, and you start to really love that piece of music, you love it because you feel something from it, right? Like, it's not just you thinking, oh, that's a clever use of harmony. Like, it kind of transcends that a little bit, I would say. It certainly does for me. I mean,
for sure. It has to, doesn't it? Otherwise you're just going, that was I enjoyed the way they moved from part A but so much of music and analysis is that, isn't it? It's just so dry and painful.
Well, when I've talked to students who are interested in composing on acoustic guitar, I do try and use more emotive vocabulary and to describe things like harmony, because I think it's kind of interesting to kind of hear how people feel this stuff. What you making choices in a piece of music. What does that make you feel? And it can be really small things. I mean, even just like the use of dissonance, for example. Like, if you were going to use, I don't know, like a B minor. You just play it straight up like this, or perhaps you want to do something more like this, and rather than kind of going down the route of like naming the specific chord, like, it's more like, well, what impact is that having? Like, what is going on there? If you wanted to have this,
what is going on there for you? Tell us, describe it in Will McNicol's mind. What that sort of those two chords, what would you describe them as different?
Well, I would say that if we take this versus this,
can you visually describe what you changed there as well?
So what I'm doing here is a B minor, what you would associate as being a B minor bar chord shape at the second fret, root on the fifth string, just with the open E on the first string. So you have everything else is just a standard B minor. But then if I just remove my little finger, I get the open third string G in there. And you get some interesting dissonance as a result of that. Mostly like that F sharp and G together. Mm-hmm. And you think, okay, well, both are fine. Both work. one of them sounds a little bit more on edge than the other. It doesn't make you feel at ease in the same way as the one which doesn't have the dissonance. So that kind of thing of just something being not quite right in that context can be quite nice to use. I'm writing a piece, I've just written a piece which uses some pretty brutal dissonance.
Really? Oh, I can't wait to hear that.
Just in one moment. And the reason for it is, like, quite often when I'm writing, I'll have like imagery or story in my mind as I'm composing, because it helps guide the process a bit.
Well, do you conjure, or that it just happens, or do you actually sort of use it as a tool of bringing a picture into your mind to sort of help you?
It's almost akin to kind of, I don't know, like trying to figure out a story in my mind as I'm writing, or maybe I have imagery in my head before I start, but quite often the two will develop alongside one another. And I have this piece called The Cartographer, which is soon to be released, and it tracks the story of an old map maker in a kind of fantasy world in my mind. And they kind of go off on one last quest to map the world around them and go on this big adventure. Goes out from his cozy office and just gets out into the world and experiences kind of some crazy stuff along the way. And there's this bit in the piece towards the beginning where I'm trying to create the image of him being at work and being kind of having almost like a little conversation with himself, perhaps. So there's a kind of like an elegance to it, to his kind of work, I suppose. And then it kind of moves up. But as it develops, it gets to this point where I'm... So hidden in that harmony is those quite brutal moments of dissonance kind of in there. And that's that kind of unease that one would get, kind of the trepidation before an adventure, or the trepidation before kind of like setting out into the unknown. You know, it's like it's all kind of cool, but there's a little bit of you that's like, yeah, is this cool?
So did you find that those images and that storyline came before that, or was it a sort of a little bit of, oh, it's really cool if it's dissonant, okay, well, I'm going to match the story to it to help make sense of it?
It's a little bit of the former, insofar as the idea of him going on that kind of adventure or whatever was kind of in my mind beforehand, and then exploring these kind of dissonances kind of came as almost like alongside it, but not necessarily me thinking, right, I'm actively going to put a dissonant moment in here to match up with this particular moment in the story. They kind of develop alongside one another in that regard, and I just enjoy that. Like I enjoy that as a process, you know, just to kind of like finding these little moments in the music and in the harmony, and I think, okay, well, and that's how I often try and encourage students to start a writing process. Is like you could kind of try and conjure up an image to write music for. You try and kind of find a harmony, and you think, well, how does that make me feel? What kind of imagery does that bring up in your mind, and can you take that further as you're writing? So it's a fun process, and like, you know, one that's, when I was started writing music like all those years ago, it's just developed from that point, and I've put together like a way of thinking about writing music on the guitar called the 4 hats, where I'm kind of going through different headspaces as I'm working. So like I might be thinking of myself as a guitarist, I might be thinking of myself as a composer, I might be thinking of myself as an arranger and as an artist, and what do those headspaces kind of give to that process to keep it moving forward. You know, if you get stuck on one point, you just take one hat off and put another one on, and 9 times out of 10 it leads you to somewhere new and different, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I like that. The 4 hats. So what is it? Artist, composer?
Yeah, guitarist, composer, arranger, and artist.
Nice.
I make the point in it where, like, when I first started, like, the artist thing was like really low. I didn't really think of myself in that way, or like try to write music in that way. It was like all guitar-y stuff. I was like, right, guitar. And then over the years, like, those kind of have evened out, and they all have kind of like an equal footing these days, which is quite nice.
You think for that difference from guitarist and artist being two sort of separate entities?
They were to begin with, right? And they've kind of coalesced. And what I kind of share is, like, you know, the guitar is a very inspiring instrument to play. So when you are a guitarist, you learn things that you can call upon when you're writing music. It, you know, might be technical, might be your knowledge of the fretboard. All these things you learn as a guitarist can be really great to help inspire the journey. But they can be, if it's all of that, then it can become quite, the guitar can become a little bit of a dictator in the process, you know. But if you can start applying some of the other elements, you know, you can kind of hopefully just get that kind of perfect mix of all of them, which end up with a really, like, satisfying piece of music at the end of the day, you know. So yeah,
I think it's quite interesting from that percussive guitar element, because so much if I've created percussive pieces, it can feel very guitar-y, because obviously you're usually inspired by the instrument itself, the sound that the instrument is making, be it a particular hit or whatever. But that, I think that quickly becomes artistry, because it's then you're just sort of excited by that sound, and it's but I think it can be missed to a listener. Then it can be misconstrued as being a guitar-y, you know, widdly without artistry thing, because it is so guitar-y. Do you know what I mean? But ultimately it can be quite a driving, the uniqueness of the guitar can be such a creative force and fire in writing.
Big time. Oh my God, absolutely.
So. But then it's interesting thinking about Clive Carroll, for example, who I believe, I don't know if he told me this or you told me this, but he will write quite often on piano or in notation first, maybe before writing on the guitar sometimes.
Yeah, he's shared the fact, I think, on a few pieces that he started on piano or developed them on piano and then put them on the guitar.
Which is really interesting, isn't it? Because that's just like, I don't know, it's just so non-guitar-y, isn't it?
Well, exactly, but quite liberating in some respects, I think. Look, I mean, there's no right or wrong, is there? So there's so many ways you can go.
There is. And I'm here to tell you, totally,
wrong.
Totally, isn't it? Totally.
And that's the joy of it, really, is that there is no right or wrong. I can only speak from my own experience, and for me, I found myself, whenever I felt like I got, like, stuck in ruts or like just going around the same stuff over and over again, what has helped me is looking away from the guitar.
Interesting.
And
because the guitar itself has become the prison, the physical prison. That you're
it's
in.
like you know, you start landing on the things that you always do because you know, they come naturally to you, which is great, you know. But if you're wanting to kind of like just create new ideas and things that maybe aren't dictated by a particular technique that's comfy for you, or a particular kind of shape that you like using, or whatever it might be, sometimes you can look away from the guitar. And it can be.
See,
quite
for me,
helpful.
Will, that's always been tuning differently. So
yeah, well, that's a completely legitimate way of going about it, and I think that's great as well. Like the being able to explore alternate tunings in that very free way of just like, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what I can create here. I think that's great.
So what do you do away from guitar then? What's your sort of?
Well, one of the things that I quite enjoy doing is when I'm writing a piece, or I've got like let's say I've got the beginnings of an idea. It might be a little sketch of an idea. I'll record it and I will listen to it ad nauseum, like just over and over again. I'll go out for a walk, listen on headphones, and I'll start doing more of the work just in my mind.
Do you ever question if that might be slightly narcissistic, Will?
Well, I'm not enjoying it in that sense, you know, but what I'm trying to do is understand where it might be going. And rather than it kind of being the direction of it being dictated by what I would maybe naturally go to from a guitarist point of view, I would think, well, where do I want this to go if I'm thinking about it just purely as music? And maybe the melody might develop in my mind, or maybe like, or it could be as kind of loose as just feeling like, oh, well, it needs to rise here and descend there, or it could be something, it needs to build here and then kind of strip back down there. All of those kind of things start happening in my mind, which maybe wouldn't happen if I was just stuck to the guitar all the time. It just frees me up a little bit, which I quite like. So that's one of the big things that I do, kind of away.
Literally physical distance from the instrument.
Physical distance. Pop it down, go for a walk, and just listen. And just kind of... I'm almost... I mean, it sounds a bit mad, but I'm almost trying to listen out for little clues in it. Like, what is going on in there? Like, it almost feel... Some of these ideas feel like they are trying to tell me what's going to happen, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. And it's like, it's there somewhere. But I just think if I listen to it over and over and over again, I think I'll get a better understanding of what's going on.
I think that's beautiful.
And that can be really helpful at any stage of the process, whether it's like right at the beginning or towards the end and you're trying to work on like the interpretation of it. Recording and listening can be really valuable. The other thing I like doing is getting other people's opinions. And, you know, if you have people like, I mentioned Clive, but also Gerald Garcia, there's another great player and composer who I often use as a bit of a sounding board. And I love getting other insights from people whose kind of way of going about things I really value and trust. And it's not to say that I take on board everything, but I don't necessarily do everything that they say, because there's a balance there, isn't it? I'm not trying to write a bit of Gerald Garcia music necessarily when I'm going there. I'm just trying to get his insights and think, have you thought about this? No, I hadn't thought about that. Have you thought about that? And it's just opening up possibilities. So that's really enjoyable. I love doing that. So those are a couple of things. I also quite like imagining things in different musical contexts. So, for example, like, what if this bit of music was not being written for guitar? Like, what would it be doing? In one sense, you could say, well, if this was being written for a band, what would this be doing? And it helps me separate out the voices. So, for example, like if I've got something going on with like a bass line within it, can I just take that bass line out and just play it as a bass line and just think to myself, is that a good bass line? Am I happy with that as a bass line? What would a bassist do? You know, and then maybe
I don't want to ask that question, mate.
Yeah, risky question to ask, perhaps. But then I will go and kind of work on it almost sometimes like as an individual thing, and then put it back in again. So a few different ways that I like thinking about that.
Nice. I like that. That's interesting. I tend to share my music with other people because I look for validation from others. I
have given you some validation over the years, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks. That's just some of us need. You know, I think this goes back to your, you know, I feel happy with that in contrast to my. I think it's cool, man, getting people's feedback. But joking aside from my sort of self-deprecating, I need people's validation. I do think that's quite a legitimate question to ask yourself as well, because I think it's particularly common to actually need that.
Oh God,
to sort of thrive on that, and to actually ask yourself the question if you are asking for feedback or if you are actually asking for validation.
Yeah, I mean, this is
for someone to go, it's all right. No, it's not crap. You know,
that's a very good point, actually. And, you know, why are you asking that question in the first place? And I have to say, like, sometimes I've had a session with Gerald, and there's part of me, a small part of me that's just like, wouldn't it be nice if you just said, that's some of the best guitar music I've ever heard, man. Don't change a thing.
But he never does.
But he never says that. He never does say that. There's always something else to think about. And that's what I love about it. There's always something else you can think about. And sometimes it's just nice to be reminded of that fact. I can be guilty of getting tunnel vision sometimes.
So, well, what I love so much about your playing, amongst all the many things that I love about your playing, is the expressive nature of your finger styling and your picking hand.
Well, thank you, Chris. That's kind of you to say.
Well, it's the variety. I think even when you played that composition that you created very early on, which was relatively simplistic, as you said, what made it so beautiful was the articulation in this right hand, really picking hand stuff that just lifts it out. Also delivered, beautiful sound on your instrument, and you're wearing a very classy jumper.
Thank you. Yeah, the jumper is very important, of course. In fact, funnily enough, like this, the wooliness of this jumper or jumpers that I have was a point of issue when I was recording the album with Inatet in the studio, because I was moving my arm around on the guitar, and it would just pick up this kind of sound. And that's a challenge.
This is serious stuff, man. Well, I mean, I remember back to our recording scenario and your nose being quite problematic.
Always problematic, man. And
that's not really something you can change your jumper, but you can't change your nose, can you?
Well, it's ever since it got broken really badly, and it's just kind of been like just not ideal in front of Mike. Like sometimes it just whistles and not particularly in tune either, which is even worse. But yeah, it's always been an issue, my breathing on recordings. I'll have to say, like when we were recording that album with Inatet Volume 2 a couple of Decembers ago now, our wonderful studio engineer Andrea Gobbi, after we just got all the mics set up, we were just doing some tests of the sound and everything else, and we did a couple of takes, and he just so diplomatically said, "Will, yeah, no, it's sounding great, man. Really, really great. I was just wondering, just wanted to ask a little bit about the breathing." I was like, "Yeah, what about it, Andrea?" And it's bad, man. And I think that certain microphone setups are very unforgiving. And I felt instantly jealous of the string players who had microphones like so far away from their instruments in comparison, whereas mine, I was just really under the microscope, and it was just like, my nose was tricky. I have to say, I kind of had meant to, but I'd forgotten to explore those. You can get those nose strips that kind of try and kind of widen the airways a bit. I need to try those. But
I mean, it can become a thing. Like, I mean, this is half joking, but also, isn't it like Keith Jarrett, like recordings of, and there's breathing, and that sort of adds to it. I mean, I suppose yours is just sort of a constant whistling.
Well, it's also just, it's not a nice sound. Like, I get the idea.
I find it quite comforting.
No, well, I mean, you should hear some of it though, man. I mean, it's like hearing breathing is one thing. Right, if it's just natural and it sounds clear and you sound well. The problem with what I've got going on with my nose is that it's not a nice sound. I don't. This is a podcast. We're dealing with an audio format, so perhaps we don't need to go.
And I cannot hear the whistling of your nose right now.
This is good. This is good news. But I am conscious of it, and
maybe we could have a moment of silence where we can just.
You want to hear my nose?
So enough about breathing, Will. Let's talk about this emotional and dynamic, emotional right hand.
A really lovely way of putting it.
What did we say? We didn't say emotional, did we? We said
emotive. Is that the word you're looking for?
Emotive. Expressive. You breathe so much. Expressive. Yeah. There you go. I think expressive is a far better description of it. Go on, tell us how do you sort of get there, I suppose.
Well, I suppose one of the things that I've always been kind of interested in, or what I've noticed, right, because I started the journey as like a good classical boy. We're learning guitar, proper classical and all this kind of stuff. And then I went to the dark side with steel strings and kind of took in some of the more steel string approach. And what I kind of noticed as I was kind of like hopping and skipping between both of those worlds was that there, in the classical realm, there's an awful lot of attention to detail in the picking hand, in terms of like articulation, in terms of dynamic and all of this kind of stuff. And in the steel string world, there's a lot of character and personality in the picking hand, right? But that level of detail seems to be a little bit less discussed. And I found it kind of interesting. And I thought that actually, as I started applying some of the classical stuff to steel strings, I was like, oh, that's actually quite nice. It's quite good. I think the steel string guitar can work really, really well with that. And you can get some really, lovely results from doing that. So things like dynamic control of individual fingers on the picking hand, things like where are you playing?
Can you show us what you mean by that dynamic control?
Dynamic control, yeah, sure. I mean, you could be doing like a simple arpeggio, something like this. And you might want to shine a spotlight on one element of that arpeggio. So you might want to accent the bass, which comes quite naturally because the thumb is a naturally powerful digit. But you might want to accent the middle string, so index being the loudest element. Maybe middle finger. And that's quite nice to be able to do is it because it kind of shines a spotlight on particular areas of the piece, and maybe there's a melody or a little counter melody hidden in the middle strings, and it's nice to be able to bring that up. So that is kind of an interesting thing to explore. And then where you're actually playing, are you playing near the neck of the guitar to get quite a sweet sound, or are you playing near the bridge to get a more metallic sound, and kind of making the most of all of that tonal contrast the guitars are so wonderful at? Things like
I think that's particularly interesting, the classical link there, because that is such a classical thing.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
That tonal, that expression is there, whereas so much more of sort of more what I don't know what would be regarded as more like folk music, I suppose. It will be the engine of it is rhythm, and therefore there's more consistency.
Yeah, and it's more monodynamic and more monotonal, which is fine. That definitely has its place. But I started getting quite into exploring how that approach with the picking hand can be applied to steel strings and what you can get out of it, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, dynamic control, tonal control, and also other things that you have to explore, like the angle of attack. Like, are you playing with a 45-degree angle of attack where you get a really round tone, or are you playing with a more 90-degree angle where it's much more direct? And you can get a huge variety from that. And I found in general that it wasn't, steel string guitars weren't necessarily being played so much in that way, So that started me off on a bit of a journey, and it kind of suited the way that I was composing, and I quite liked writing with that kind of quality in the playing, the two things went hand in hand. And then I was like, well, I talk to students about this quite often, and ended up, creating lots of kind of pieces or little exercises based around that idea. And ended up kind of thinking, well, this could make quite a nice book, actually. I think enough people seem to be asking me about it. So I reached out to the publishing company Fundamental Changes, who've done some amazing books of great players, all genres. And I said, hey, I've got this idea for a book. What do you reckon? And they were quite keen. So we collaborated on the first book that I wrote for them, which is called Expressive Fingerstyle Guitar Techniques, which is kind of digging into a lot of what I'm just talking about there in a lot of detail through kind of musical exercises that I think are quite fun and satisfying to play, leading into like full pieces that really try and get the most out of that side of things. Again, it just comes back to that idea of when you're trying to learn something useful, it's nice to use it. And use it in a real world context rather than it just being left as like an exercise. It's nice to actually use this stuff. And when I'm watching like a performance of acoustic guitar, I love hearing that level of detail. It draws me in. Regardless of the genre, if you hear someone like really playing with dynamic or tone and all of those lovely details that add up, I think it's very engaging.
For sure. I think it's actually quite a rare thing to even have that as part of your set of sort of intentions of knowing where dynamically you sit when you play a note.
Yeah,
do you know what
massively.
I mean? Like that's sort of what is in the middle. I've always find that particularly well with listening to yourself or Julian Lage or Larger, however we say his last name. Is it Large?
Lage, isn't it? No, it's not.
Steve. What I particularly really like about his playing is he has this. He's got this wonderful middle volume that he seems to have, and then the movements out of that, be it to louder or to gentler, are so small and delicate. It's that you can clearly see there's this real intention and deliberate understanding of the volume and tone that he's playing. And I think, so many players, myself included, I really have to sort of remind myself, especially on stage.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it? It's that sort of going out and going, do you know what your loudest and quietest is? Because you're just on autopilot. You don't.
Yeah, exactly, man. And it's nice to explore that, especially when you're practicing as well. I have to remind myself, like you hopefully are able to kind of connect with this stuff in a kind of intuitive way where you're not necessarily actively thinking, I'm getting louder now, I'm getting softer now when you're performing. It just kind of comes naturally and you're just kind of responding to the music that you're playing. But in order to access that, you have to have the ability to do it. And therefore, it could probably benefit from a little bit of practice. And when you're on your own in your room, just practicing to yourself, there isn't such an impetus to going to be playing with things like dynamic in the same way as you would maybe if you're performing. But it's nice to do in the practice room, I think. Like what is your loudest, point? How loud can you go? How soft can you go? And what I always find interesting is that when you think you're getting louder or you think you're conveying like a loud volume or you're getting louder, it seems to go through this process of translation. Like what you think is happening then gets translated into your hands, then into the instrument and then out to the listener. And by the time it's got there, it's kind of been watered down a bit. So actually, sometimes when I'm doing something and I'm going to get really loud here, and I think, oh man, am I taking that a bit too far? I'll listen back and think that's absolutely fine. Like it's actually quite subtle, but I thought it was a bigger deal. So sometimes you've got to really kind of push the envelope a little bit. And when you're practicing, it's a nice thing to try. So the book is really all about that. I'm going to dig into it in a lot of detail. And then it kind of led on to a couple more books. For fundamental changes, one of them looking at scales, and the other one that's just come out is looking at arpeggios, both through the lens of fingerstyle guitar. I think scales and perhaps arpeggios as well, they suffer from a bit of a PR problem. Like in the practice room, it's like, do you practice your scales? Like, no, I think I'd rather do anything else. And I think in the realm of fingerstyle, where it's very repertoire driven, I think, as a way of playing, it's like I want to learn that piece because I love how it sounds. Like, where does scales and practicing scales and arpeggios fit into that? Whereas in something like, I don't know, jazz guitar, or maybe something that's more improvisation focused, perhaps there's more.
It's also the contrapuntal element.
Yeah,
right? Two notes at the same time being, that's what sort of makes fingerstyle awesome.
Exactly.
So how did you do that in the scale book then? Did you just bring in other notes played in harmony, or? Yeah,
well, it comes back to that idea of like, well, let's use stuff in the context. So like thinking, well, what's the end goal here? It's to kind of facilitate even richer playing or writing of fingerstyle music. So here's a scale, here's what you can do with it. So I usually do a thing where I'll be like, well, you could play an E major scale, you could do something like this, and that's fine. But the nice thing about guitar is that you can find those notes elsewhere, and you can create, lush sounding textures with the exact same scale if you just think about it in a slightly different way. So part of the book is exploring that. It's like, well,
20 people just simultaneously went, I'm going to get that book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's quite...
That sounds nice.
Well, exactly. That's the thing, right? As soon as you hear that thing, you're like, oh, that's cool. I quite like that. And scales get a bad rap because often people think of them as these linear things that they're stuck in a shape or in a pattern, and like, that's that. But I talk...
What about arpeggios then? What's the sort of...
So arpeggios being the thing where, you might see arpeggios being used with open position chords, for example. Like you might do something like this between C and A minor or something, and you think, okay, happy days. But what what I show in the book is like, okay, well, you know, you might be able to play a 1 octave C major arpeggio using the open position shape. But what if you wanted to take that further? What if you wanted to add in an extra octave and get it up high? Would you know how to do that? And I think that that's maybe where some fingerstyle guitarists kind of, their knowledge kind of ends, or they struggle with that next step. So like doing something like, so being able to get up the fretboard a bit, you know, you think, oh, that's just adding another octave. Like, okay, so that takes you up here, so that's interesting. So C major exists down here, it exists further up the fretboard. And then similarly, well, you know, you have, you know, the same arpeggios can be voiced in different places, and that gives you access to different notes, different sounds. So it's about trying to expand the knowledge of arpeggios by going like, well, here's it here, but you can also play it here, and this is cool because it gives you this extra note or an extra, like a different sound, different texture, which can be quite inspiring when you're writing. And then you can write little exercises, and I showcase little things where like, here's an arpeggio, but here's some music you can play with it. And then adding a little bit of colour by adding in other notes from the scale to those arpeggios to create quite rich sounding pieces, but they're rooted in kind of like arpeggios, and I go through like some common keys that, you know, most guitarists play in, and we just kind of dig into that, like, well, here's a 1 octave arpeggio, but did you know you can do a 2 octave like this, and this is how you move up the neck, like smoothly, and you can even go all the way up to 3 octaves, and it's just thinking about how you move up and finding those notes elsewhere, and how that can lead into some really interesting music making in the realm of fingerstyle, you know. So that's what the books are really digging into. It's like taking these ideas that maybe are slightly underexplored in the realm of fingerstyle, and then showing like, well, actually they can be kind of cool, man. Like, they can be really cool, they can be really satisfying, they can help you with things like expression and your ability to really communicate music, but they can also help you with the nitty-gritty stuff of like fretboard knowledge and like picking hand technique and, you know, left hand movements up and down the neck, you know, all of this stuff. So there's some technical stuff in there, but it's all wrapped up in like, it's nice to play, it's fun and satisfying to play this stuff.
Amazing. Will, thank you so much.
That's my pleasure, Chris.
A huge thank you to Ibanez UK for making this conversation possible.